And when a murderer is jailed, we often hear the victims' loved ones tell us that they too are facing a life sentence, that they're being forced to relive their grief every time that killer is considered for release from prison on parole.
Well, that is the reality for the families of Dawn Ashworth and Linda Mann, who were both 15 when they were murdered by Colin Pitchfork in the 1980s.
He was granted parole last year, but he's still in prison after ministers challenged the decision. In a moment, we're going to talk to Dawn's uncle about what might happen next. But first, Tim Moffat reminds us of the case.
A man is charged with the murder of two Leicestershire girls, Dawn Ashworth and Linda Mann.
It was a police investigation that would change detective work around the world forever. Colin Pitchfork was sentenced to life in prison in 1988 for the murder and rape of two 15-year-olds, Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth. The attacks had happened in Leicestershire in 1983 and 1986. During the investigation, Richard Buckland, a 17-year-old with learning difficulties, had confessed to the murder of Dawn Ashworth, but denied murdering Linda Mann. Detectives were convinced the same person had carried out both attacks. They'd heard about new research being done at the University of Leicester, in which DNA from cells had been attached to photographic film. The result? Each person's individual DNA could be read. Detectives could now check whether Buckland's DNA matched that found at the crime scene.
They came back not connected. The result was stunning. Well, it was a blow because it meant that we'd got the wrong man.
Buckland was released. The very first time DNA profiling was used in a criminal case, it cleared a suspect. Police then asked all men living in the area to give a sample of their DNA. Linda Mann's uncle and aunt spoke to Breakfast in 2020 about that development.
I had to go and give blood, and when I went, I had to queue. The queue were amazing for all these males all queuing up to have the bloods took.
They wanted it sorting out as much as we did. And to see all these people queuing in the three villages, it was unbelievable.
More than 5,000 men gave a blood sample voluntarily, and eventually the killer was caught. Colin Pitchfork, a local baker, became the first person ever to be convicted on the basis of genetic evidence. He was given a life sentence with a minimum term of 30 years. In 2021, he was released on licence by the parole board, but was recalled to prison 2 months later after approaching young women while out walking. That recall was then deemed inappropriate. In June of last year, he was granted parole again, but Justice Secretary Alex Chalk intervened, and his release was blocked by the parole board in December. Challenging the latest decision to keep him behind bars, Colin Pitchfork is now set to face a new parole board hearing, with different people on the panel. Dawn Ashworth's mother Barbara said in response that words failed her. Given the chance, she said, she would throw away the key.
We are joined here in the studio now by Dawn Ashworth's uncle, Phil Musson. Morning to you.
Good morning.
And we've just heard the words of your sister Barbara there. How are you and your family doing after this latest update?
Well, you know, you never recover from the pain of losing a beautiful young life, as my niece was. But this continued question and these continued catalogue of errors, really, on behalf of the parole board, are really seeking to undermine justice for Dawn and Linda Mann by the continual discussion about this man's release, which I regard as wholly inappropriate.
And just when you thought it was sorted, it's then reopened again.
Absolutely, yes. I'll admit to being relieved in December 23 when we heard that, thanks to Alex Chalk's intervention, asking the parole board to review its decision due to the danger that this man posed, because they gave permission for his release in June 23, The judge found that it wasn't safe. It was, in fact, irrational to release him. But there were procedural irregularities in the process that he is using to challenge his continued detention. And
how much power do you feel you have in all of this?
Well, very, very little. I find it quite bizarre that the parole board's decision when it comes to release or continued detention rests on one thing, which is a test of whether or not they can be satisfied that the protection of the public or the public can be protected without his continued confinement. There's no concept of the seriousness of the case, of the impact of the victims or the victim's family or the communities where these horrendous offences took place, which is still, it's still in a state of shock. And the clip that you very helpfully showed, I still have to catch my breath even when I see this. Not only is the offence itself horrendous, but my niece being a victim of it as well, it still catches your breath.
You still can't quite believe it?
No, such as the, and it's obviously sort of reverberated through the decades, but as to the sort of life that she would have led, I knew her life up until she was 15, and that's when it was snuffed out in such a unimaginably awful way. Mm-hmm.
So with her in your minds every day, what would you like to happen if you were setting the policy, not just for this case, but similar tragic cases? What do you think should happen?
I think there are some crimes that are so horrendous, so abhorrent, have such an impact on the local communities where they took place, that rehabilitation is not appropriate under any circumstance. These are two such crimes, and that is right. I'm a defender of human rights, but people that take away the rights of others forfeit their own.
So you wouldn't have any parole hearings for a case like this, for the Pitchfork?
No.
Case? No.
A life sentence would mean a life sentence. Dawn and Linda Mann, they've got a life sentence. They've got no opportunity for parole or picking up their lives again. That's it for them.
And obviously, you've had many, many years of dealing with this, and there have been various justice secretaries who've come and gone over the years. How much contact have you had? How much impact do you feel you've been able to make? Do you feel you've been able to say your piece, if you like, to government?
I've been kept abreast of developments largely through media interest and journalism and people like yourselves. And I do appreciate the role you play in holding the organs of the state to account. That said, I did get to reply to an email I sent to Dominic Raab, who was the previous Secretary of State for Justice, when he was considering how to reform the parole board under the Victims and Prisoners Bill, which unfortunately isn't on the statute book yet, and therefore might not apply to Pitchfork's current application for parole. But I do appreciate the lengths that he went to, and his successor, Alex Chalk. They do seem sincere at taking the issue of this very, very seriously. And I also appreciate, if I can say this, take this opportunity to say that, the local Leicestershire MP, Alberta Costa, because he's been unwavering in his support for justice for Dawn and Linda. Phil,
in the next hour, we're going to be joined here on the sofa by the family of Barnaby Webber, who was one of the 3 people who died in the Nottingham attacks last year. So a much more recent incident, much more recent crime. You'll have seen on Breakfast and other TV outputs, are campaigning for a different kind of justice issue. But they're much newer into this whole process. It's a more recent crime that they're dealing with. What would you say to them from your family's experience of dealing with loss and the system about how you hold it together going forward, how you have a voice, how you look after yourselves as well.
Keep strong, fight for what you know to be right, fight for the people who unfortunately can no longer speak for themselves and speak for them, as they are doing. And already I'm confident that they'll have some success with the review that they appear to have won. So well done to them, and my heart goes out to them for their loss too.
And you continue to fight?
Yes, for as long as I've got breath in my body, I'll speak for justice for Dawn.
Phil Musson, thank you so much for coming in and sitting on the sofa. I think it's the first time you've done a live TV interview, isn't it, like this, after all these years? But,
it is.
Thank you for sharing your story, and best wishes to your sister as well. The family.
Thank you. Well, you've made it as comfortable as it could have been for me. So
all right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.